So here we're going to start assignment 4 in lesson 4, which deals with buildings in school sites that are within 10 feet of FEMA flood zone. And so I have over here loaded, I've got the 3 shape files from our homework 4 data folder. And I've also downloaded the buildings layer from the Metro RLIS site. And so I've added that to my folder here, and then immediately just gone up here to File and Save As, and created this homework 4 MXD file. It's obviously pointing to the wrong location here, but that's this MXD file that I'm currently working on. That way, if things crash, I can always go back to this point as a good starting point. So the first step for us to do here, we're going to be dealing with select by location. So the book does a pretty decent job, I think, talking about using select by location. So I'm going to go up to select by location, and what I want to do is select school sites that I have here identified in red within 10 feet of the FEMA flood zone. So I'm going to fill that out in the dialog box here. With the selection methods, 99 times out of 100, I'm going to use select features from, but you do have multiple options here. So these are just things to think about in the future that you can. The only one I've ever used really more frequently than the others here is to select from currently selected features. So if we had a case where we had something already selected and you wanted to make a selection within a selection, essentially, that's where you would do it or how you would do it. It's one way. So we're gonna select our target layer is we want school sites. So we want school sites that are going to be within. So we're going to go with our source layer as being the FEMA flood zone. And then we want to use the spatial selection method. There's 13 options here. Sometimes you're just going to have to try these, but we know that are within a distance of the source layer. So we're going to specify that distance here. We're going to just type in 10 feet. And I just made this number up. So for the example, 10 feet was just a number that I gave you. It could be 100 feet, or it could be completely within, or it could be all sorts of different things. So start thinking about your own projects. Not that we're going to have a project for this class, but think about the future of how you would use these selection methods. We're going to go ahead and hit apply. Sometimes this takes a long time. Sometimes it's fairly quick. Depends upon the processing speed of your computer. And then we're going to hit OK. And so what it's done is it's in that query, essentially, it's selected school sites that meet that criteria. And you can always just verify that this actually worked correctly by just zooming in, and so when you zoom into the school site, you're like, well, yeah, is that within 10 feet? That looks pretty correct. Is this one? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe that distance isn't 10 feet. We can check it. So we could zoom in a little bit further. And we could actually measure the distance. So I'm going to use the measure tool here, and I'm just going to make sure that I'm measuring in feet. So I'm measuring in feet. Go back to use the linear distance, pull that distance, and you see, okay, well, that's 30 feet. So yeah, it's correct. So the selection looks like it's done its job, essentially. So I'm just going to zoom back to previous here. So it looks like we've done what we needed to do. So now I want to make a layer of that. So I'm going to point down here to my school sites. I'm going to right click on it. I'm going to go down to selection and then create layer from selected features. And that's going to create this temporary file. So this is school site selection. Notice I have over here in catalog, it does not show up as a shapefile. So I need to export that. So if I want to actually own it, which I do, I want to own it basically. So I'm going to right click on it, point down to data, export data. And now I'm going to send it to my homework 4 folder. Now, Esri gives it a terrible name. It's called export output. So if you want to change that, which I would highly recommend that you do that, you can always change it later, but I would probably want to change it to something that actually makes sense. So I'm going to click on the browse folder here. Notice that it's going to the folder where I wanted it to go. So it's where I wanted to send it. But if I had to navigate, I could do that. So I'll just navigate there. So for me, it's FT228, homework 4 folder, and then here's my shapefiles. So I can change the name of it here. No spaces in the name. I'm going to call this school sites within 10 feet FEMA flood. Pretty prescriptive, very descriptive, but no spaces in here. You could use underscores or you can use just no spaces. So I'm gonna hit save. Okay. Esri's gonna ask me, do I wanna add that exported layer? I'm gonna say yes, because I would like to see it. And then note that it shows up over here in my catalog tree as well within the folder. So now that I own that or possess it. So I'm gonna right click and remove this temporary selection file. And the next thing I want to do is I want to clear my selected features. So you don't want to print your map with these selected features on there. They will stick out like a neon sign. So I want to clear my selected features within my school site selection. I'm also going to turn off the school sites layer because I no longer need that. I only want this one. I'm going to change the color and put it to red. So these would be the school sites that were within 10 feet of the FEMA flood zone. Okay, so we can look a little bit more in depth here. You know, you might want to focus on this portion of Western Portland, greater Western Portland, maybe down into Hillsborough a little bit, Beaverton. But you can do whatever in terms of your overall map. It's kind of up to you. I'm now going to turn my buildings layer on. This has 750,000 buildings. It's a LiDAR derived file. It's actually really pretty darn impressive, to be honest with you. It's fairly old. I want to say it's 2005. So now I want to select buildings that are going to be within this school site. So we're going to go back up to selection, select by location. Now we're going to select features from buildings. And I want to select buildings that are within school sites within 10 feet of the FEMA flood. And here I'm going to change my spatial selection. Are within a distance of the source layer feature? No, I want to get rid of that. I want to are completely within the source layer feature. Okay. There's other ways to do this, but that's probably going to be the best one for us at this particular time. So are within the source layer feature. You can also say are completely within. You don't need to apply a linear distance. So we're going to say are within the source layer feature. We're going to hit apply. This is going to take a little bit longer because there's a lot more records to run through. And so now what we're going to end up with is a building selection. So these will be buildings that are within the FEMA flood zone or within 10 feet of FEMA flood zone within the school sites. We're going to hit OK. I should have just hit OK instead of apply because now it has to run basically twice. But I mean, when you think about it, it's a lot faster than you manually doing this, as it's doing, 10,000 records per second, basically. So same thing now, we're going to right click on our buildings layer. We're going to go down to selection, create layer from selected features. That creates our building selection. We're going to then export that so that we have it. So these would be buildings or school site buildings. So we're going to data, export data. And I'm just going to rename it I'm going to say school buildings, FEMA flood. We could give it a different name at a later point. Say yes. Shows up over here. And now I'm going to just turn these other layers off just so it doesn't redraw every single time. I'm going to remove the building selection layer just so it's out of my table of contents. And now these would be the 4 layers that I would want to use for my final map. And everybody's map is going to be different. I probably would not want to make a map at this scale. It just doesn't seem to make much sense, but find a place in, you know, in an area that maybe you live by or something that's interesting to you. This western side of Portland looks pretty interesting as there's some locations here. Note that there's probably some issues with our map here in terms of if we just pick on this school site, for example. Note here that, well, let's change the school site so we can make this hollow. And that way we can at least see the boundary of it. But no, there's no building, so there's still a pretty good linear distance. It just is that the school site is within the FEMA flood zone, but the buildings are actually not. Versus if we go down to, you know, parts of Portland, I think over in this region maybe, or over in this region, there might be a little bit of a difference here. So yeah, like this spot here, you actually have some buildings that are within the FEMA flood zone and within school sites. So there might be a different way of doing a selection where you would get that only these buildings, because these seem to be the problematic buildings, not these buildings. So you could actually write a separate selection where it was they're within the school sites 10-foot FEMA flood zone and they're within the FEMA flood zone. So that might be a better solution in the future so that you would get less records, you know, you would get less records than this, because right now it's going to show there's 612. There's really not 612 that are actually touching it. It's probably more in the 70s or something along those lines. So anyway, hopefully that helps you. And if you have any questions, let me know.